What if you trusted someone so completely that they became the very reason your entire world collapsed? Sarah Carter never imagined it could happen to her. A bright tech entrepreneur with big dreams and an unshakable determination, Sarah was on the verge of launching a startup that promised to change the way people connected with technology forever. Her life was a whirlwind of meetings, pitches, and late nights coding the future, but that day began like any other, until the phone call shattered everything. The ringing tone sliced through the quiet of her sleek San Francisco apartment, pulling her away from a screen filled with code and investor emails. "Sarah, it's Emma," her voice trembled through the speaker, "we need to talk. Now." Confused and curious, Sarah's mind raced. Emma had been her best friend since childhood, the one person she trusted more than anyone else. But the urgency in Emma's voice hinted at trouble far worse than Sarah could have anticipated. What if the person you called a friend was actually the one who would ruin your life? That question hovered in the air as Sarah stepped out into the bustling city streets, unaware that this moment would mark the beginning of a painful journey. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? These words echoed in her mind like a whisper from the future, an invitation to others who might be walking a similar path. The city lights flickered as Sarah made her way to the cafe where Emma insisted on meeting. The irony was not lost on her, this place had once been their sanctuary, a spot where dreams were shared and plans hatched over endless cups of coffee. Now, it felt cold and unfamiliar. Emma arrived moments later, her face pale, eyes darting with nervous energy. "Sarah, I messed up," she confessed, voice barely above a whisper. "There's been a leak. Someone knows about Novatech's plans, and it's spreading fast." Sarah's heart dropped. Novatech was her passion project, a cutting-edge startup ready to launch an innovative app that could revolutionize social networking. The idea that someone had betrayed her trust was like a knife twisting in her chest. Who? How? She demanded, desperate for answers. Emma hesitated, then looked away. "I don't know. But I'm scared. I think it might be me." The words hit Sarah like a storm. The friend she had leaned on through years of hardship, who had promised to stand by her no matter what, now feared she was the source of the disaster. The scene was surreal, emotions tangled in confusion and disbelief. How could one bad friend unravel everything Sarah had fought so hard to build? The night stretched on with heavy silence and half-spoken fears. Sarah returned home, her mind spinning with doubt and heartbreak. The startup that had seemed destined for greatness now teetered on the edge of collapse. But amid the chaos, a flicker of something stronger took hold, a determination not to be defeated by betrayal. This was just the beginning. Sarah's story, like so many others, would reveal a harsh truth: sometimes, the people closest to you are the ones capable of the deepest wounds. And yet, even in the darkest moments, hope can be found. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For Sarah, it was the belief that her vision was bigger than any obstacle, bigger than any friend who might turn into a foe. As dawn broke over the city skyline, she resolved to face the coming storm head-on. Because if one bad friend could ruin her life, she would prove that one strong woman could rebuild it. The journey ahead would test every ounce of her courage, resilience, and faith. But Sarah Carter was ready. The question now was, would you be? Stay tuned, because this story is far from over. Sarah Carter's story didn't start in the bright lights of Silicon Valley but in a modest house on the outskirts of Austin, Texas, where the sun scorched the earth and dreams often felt like distant stars. Raised by her mother, Linda, a nurse who worked double shifts to keep food on the table and a roof over their heads, Sarah learned early what it meant to fight for everything she wanted. Linda's sacrifices were the foundation of Sarah's fierce determination. Despite their struggles, Linda always encouraged Sarah to reach higher, whispering every night before bed, "You're meant for more, Sarah. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Growing up, Sarah was shy but endlessly curious. She was the kid who took apart broken radios and old computers, piecing them back together with more confidence than she showed in school. Her father had left when she was 5, a shadowy figure in family stories, but his absence left a space filled with questions and a burning need to prove herself. Sarah's closest companion through those lonely years was Emma Thompson. They met in 3rd grade, bonding over a shared love of comic books and science fairs. Emma was bold, charismatic, and fearless, a perfect complement to Sarah's cautious nature. Together, they dreamed of a future where nothing could stop them. Through middle school and high school, the two were inseparable. Sarah's mother watched their friendship closely, sensing Emma's influence was both a blessing and a challenge. Emma's daring sometimes led Sarah into trouble, late-night adventures, risky bets, and moments where Sarah had to decide between what was safe and what was exciting. But Sarah needed Emma. She was the spark that pushed her beyond her fears. As Sarah's love for technology deepened, she excelled in math and science, winning local competitions and earning scholarships. But the emotional landscape of her teenage years was complicated. Sarah's home life was stable but strained. Linda was tired, stretched thin, and sometimes too exhausted to engage. Sarah often took on the role of caretaker for her younger brother Michael, a bright kid with a gift for music and a gentle soul. The responsibility grounded her but also added weight to her shoulders. Emma, meanwhile, seemed to glide through life effortlessly, confident and charming. Yet beneath her surface was a restlessness that Sarah didn't fully understand. Their friendship was a dance of contrasts. Sarah's caution balanced Emma's recklessness, but it also meant Sarah often felt pulled in directions she didn't want to go. In their senior year, Sarah won a prestigious internship at a tech company in Austin, the first big step toward her dream. Emma celebrated with her but was already talking about leaving town for a different life, parties, adventure, and quick money. Sarah felt torn. Could their friendship survive such different paths? After graduation, Sarah moved to San Francisco with a suitcase full of hope and a heart full of ambition. She landed a job at a small startup and began building her vision for Novatech, a platform designed to connect people through authentic shared experiences. Emma followed a different road, dipping in and out of Sarah's life, sometimes close, sometimes distant. They talked often, but cracks were starting to show. Emma's calls came later and later, her promises thinner, her presence less reliable. Sarah buried herself in work, trying to hold on to the dream they once shared, even as Emma drifted farther away. Sarah's relationship with her mother and brother remained her anchor. Weekly calls and visits were sacred, moments of comfort in a demanding, unpredictable world. Linda's health began to decline, a silent shadow Sarah fought to ignore while juggling deadlines and investor meetings. Michael's music blossomed into something beautiful, and Sarah found pride in his successes, even as she struggled with her own fears of failure. One late night, as Sarah stared at lines of code that refused to work, her phone buzzed with a message from Emma, "Can we talk? It's important." The hope sparked by those words was quickly overshadowed by a cold dread. What had Emma gotten herself into? What did she want from Sarah now? Sarah knew that this call could change everything, but she had no idea how deep the cracks in their friendship had become or how much her trust would be tested in the days ahead. In the silence of her apartment, surrounded by blueprints and prototypes, Sarah felt the weight of all those years, of sacrifices, dreams, and the fragile thread of friendship that had once been her greatest strength. Now, it was a question mark. The past had shaped her, but the future was uncertain. Who could she trust? Who would stand by her when everything fell apart? And most importantly, could she find the courage to keep moving forward alone? These were the questions Sarah wrestled with as the night deepened and the city outside buzzed with the promise of another day. She was a woman built on resilience, forged by hardship, but even resilience has limits. Emma's presence in her life was a test, one she wasn't sure she was ready to face. But as dawn approached, Sarah made a silent vow. No matter what happened, she would not let one bad friend ruin the life she was determined to build. The story of Sarah Carter was far from over. It was only just beginning. Sarah's arrival in Silicon Valley was like stepping into a different world, one charged with energy, ambition, and the hum of endless possibility. The air buzzed with the dreams of thousands who, like her, believed they could change the world with an idea, a line of code, or a simple spark of innovation. From the moment she set foot in the city, Sarah was determined to carve out her own space. Early mornings and late nights became her rhythm as she navigated the competitive landscape of startups, pitching to investors and refining her vision for Novatech. The company was more than just a business, it was a manifestation of everything she'd dreamed about since childhood, connecting people in genuine ways through technology, creating meaningful experiences rather than empty clicks. Sarah's persistence caught the attention of James Reynolds, a seasoned investor known for backing underdogs with big ideas. James saw something rare in Sarah, a combination of grit, intelligence, and heart that couldn't be taught. He took her under his wing, offering guidance, connections, and crucial funding at a time when Novatech was still fragile. His faith in her was a lifeline, a reminder that her vision wasn't just a dream but a future waiting to be built. Meanwhile, Sarah's brother Michael had moved to Los Angeles to pursue his music career, and their weekly calls were a lifeline amid the chaos. Michael's gentle encouragement and belief in her kept her grounded, a reminder that success wasn't just about fame or fortune but about staying true to yourself. Emma was still in the picture, but the dynamics had shifted. She had come to Silicon Valley under the pretense of supporting Sarah, but her own ambitions and restlessness made her unpredictable. Sometimes, Emma was the best cheerleader Sarah could ask for, celebrating small wins and late-night breakthroughs. Other times, she disappeared without explanation, leaving Sarah to pick up the pieces alone. This push and pull in their friendship became one of the biggest challenges Sarah faced. Trusting Emma was like walking a tightrope, one wrong step could mean falling into chaos. Sarah learned to compartmentalize her doubts, focusing on her work and the future she was building. Her team grew slowly, carefully selected for skill and passion. Each new hire was a piece of the puzzle, and Sarah worked hard to cultivate a culture of trust, creativity, and resilience. She believed that the right people would carry her vision forward, and for a while, it felt like they were on the brink of something extraordinary. The workspace was modest but full of energy, walls plastered with whiteboards covered in ideas, desks cluttered with gadgets and half-empty coffee cups, and the hum of brainstorming sessions that stretched long into the night. In those moments, Sarah felt alive, connected to something bigger than herself. But even as Novatech gained momentum, shadows loomed. Investor meetings that once ended with enthusiastic handshakes began to include pointed questions about delays and security breaches. Rumors started swirling about a leak. Someone on the inside sharing Novatech's proprietary information with competitors. Sarah's heart sank. The thought that a betrayal might come from someone she trusted was unbearable. And yet, the evidence was elusive, hidden beneath layers of corporate secrecy and digital footprints. She confided in James, who advised caution but warned that trust was a fragile currency in Silicon Valley. "Protect your vision, Sarah," he said. "But don't lose your humanity in the process." Sarah's relationship with Emma became increasingly strained. There were moments of tenderness, late-night talks where they reminisced about childhood dreams and promised loyalty. But the cracks in their friendship grew wider, fueled by Emma's erratic behavior and Sarah's growing suspicion. Emma's excuses became less convincing, her explanations vague. Sarah began to question whether their friendship could survive the pressures of ambition and betrayal. Amid the tension, David Matthews entered Sarah's life. A brilliant coder with a calm demeanor and unwavering belief in Novatech's mission, David became an unexpected pillar of support. Unlike others who saw Sarah as just a CEO or a woman in tech, David treated her as an equal partner, listening to her ideas and challenging her to think bigger. Their friendship blossomed quietly, built on mutual respect and shared passion. David's presence offered Sarah a glimpse of hope, a reminder that not all relationships were fraught with risk and disappointment. He was a steady hand in a world that often felt chaotic and uncertain. As the months passed, Sarah's confidence grew, but so did the stakes. Novatech prepared for its first major demo day, a critical moment that could make or break the company. Sarah poured her soul into every detail, knowing that success would validate years of sacrifice and hard work. The night before the event, Sarah received a message from Emma: "We need to talk. It's urgent." Her heart raced. Was this the moment where everything would unravel? Or could it be a chance for reconciliation? Sarah took a deep breath and replied, "I'm listening." What happened next would change everything. Emma arrived at the office late, her eyes tired and weary. She confessed that she had made a terrible mistake. She had accidentally leaked confidential information to a rival company, putting Novatech's future at risk. The admission shattered Sarah's world. The friend she had trusted most had become the source of her deepest fear. The lines between betrayal and love blurred as Sarah grappled with anger, disbelief, and heartbreak. Could she forgive Emma? Could she salvage her company? The answers were uncertain, but Sarah knew one thing with absolute clarity: her journey was far from over. She would have to confront not only the external battles of business but the internal battles of trust and betrayal. As the city lights flickered outside her window, Sarah made a silent promise to herself. She would fight for Novatech, for her dreams, and for the future she believed in. But she would also learn that sometimes, the hardest battles are fought within. In that quiet moment, Sarah Carter understood that one bad friend could ruin your life, but one strong woman could rise from the ruins and build something even greater. The road ahead would be tough, full of unexpected challenges and painful lessons. But Sarah was ready. The dream was alive, and so was her spirit. Sarah woke to a quiet apartment, the kind of silence that felt heavy with unspoken fears. The news Emma had dropped the night before echoed relentlessly in her mind: Novatech's plans were compromised, secrets no longer safe. Sarah stared at her phone, scrolling through emails filled with concerned messages from investors and confused questions from her team. The weight of betrayal was suffocating, but what pained her most was the fractured friendship with Emma. The woman who once promised loyalty now stood on the opposite side of a deep divide. Sarah knew she couldn't afford to let this crisis break her, yet every step forward felt like walking through quicksand. The leak had already started affecting their launch timeline. Partners who once showed excitement now hesitated, their enthusiasm clouded by uncertainty. Rumors swirled in the tech circles, whispers of espionage, security flaws, and internal sabotage. Sarah convened an emergency meeting with her core team in the small conference room that doubled as their war room. Faces around the table were tense, eyes darting with worry and determination. "We need to find the source," Sarah said firmly, pushing her hurt aside for the sake of the company. "We can't let this stop us." But the deeper they dug, the more elusive the culprit became. Logs were wiped clean, communications deleted, and no clear trail emerged. The reality was brutal: someone inside their circle had betrayed them, but who? Suspicion began to poison the team. Fingers were pointed, trust eroded, and paranoia crept in. Sarah watched friendships fray, colleagues whisper behind closed doors, and morale plunge. The pressure mounted from investors demanding answers and deadlines that couldn't be moved. Emma's absence only deepened the wounds. She vanished after confessing, unreachable by phone, silent on messages. Sarah felt the sting of abandonment alongside the ache of betrayal. How could someone so close simply disappear when everything was falling apart? The nights grew longer and lonelier. Sarah pored over code, security audits, and legal documents, desperate for a breakthrough. She called in favors from old contacts in cybersecurity and even reached out to James Reynolds, whose calm guidance became a beacon. "This isn't just about the company," James said during one tense phone call. "It's about survival. You have to protect yourself, Sarah, but don't lose sight of why you started." Sarah clung to that advice, but inside, she battled waves of self-doubt. Was she naive to trust so fully? Had she missed warning signs? And most painfully, how could she reconcile the friend she loved with the traitor she feared? Then came a glimmer of hope. David Matthews, ever steady and insightful, uncovered a pattern in the digital footprints, small anomalies pointing to access from an external IP address linked to a known hacking group. It wasn't Emma acting alone, but someone exploiting her mistake to wreak havoc. This revelation shifted the battle. Now Sarah faced not only betrayal but a coordinated attack on everything she had built. With renewed focus, the team ramped up security protocols, engaged specialists, and prepared a public statement to reassure investors and users. But Sarah knew the real fight was deeper. Trust had been shattered, and rebuilding it would take more than tech fixes. Amid the chaos, Sarah sought solace in her family. A late-night call with Michael reminded her of what truly mattered beyond the screens and spreadsheets. "You're stronger than you think, Sarah," he said softly. "Whatever happens, you're not alone." The words anchored her. Slowly, Sarah began to rebuild, not just the company, but the fragile relationships around her. She reached out to her team individually, listening, apologizing for her own lapses, and inspiring them to believe again. Emma remained a painful ghost in the background, absent, yet looming large in every decision. Sarah wrestled with forgiveness, anger, and the complex web of emotions that betrayal stirs. Days turned into weeks, and the public launch of Novatech was postponed. The setback was crushing, but Sarah refused to give in. She doubled down on innovation, unveiling new features that showcased the company's resilience and vision. Media outlets picked up the story, not just of failure, but of grit and comeback. Sarah became a symbol of determination, a woman who refused to be defined by one bad friend or one broken moment. Yet beneath the surface, the scars remained. Trust, once broken, left a permanent mark. Sarah learned to be cautious, to question, and to protect her heart as fiercely as her ideas. The journey was transforming her, making her stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. As the chapter closed, Sarah stood on the balcony of her apartment, looking out over the city lights. The future was uncertain, the path fraught with challenges, but she was ready. One bad friend had shaken her world, but she was rebuilding it on her own terms. And this time, nothing would stop her. The days following the leak plunged Sarah into a whirlwind of challenges that tested every ounce of her resilience. Novatech was no longer just a startup fighting for success, it had become a battleground where trust, ambition, and survival collided. Investors were anxious, the media circled like vultures, and competitors smelled opportunity. Sarah felt the weight of the entire company on her shoulders as she navigated the storm. Early mornings blurred into late nights filled with code reviews, strategy sessions, and crisis meetings. The once vibrant office buzz had shifted into a tense, focused silence, punctuated by hurried phone calls and hurried footsteps. Despite the chaos, Sarah refused to let despair take hold. She focused on one thing, rebuilding trust and reclaiming the narrative. David Matthews was her anchor through it all. His steady presence was a balm against the relentless pressure. Together, they fortified Novatech's systems, working around the clock to plug security holes and devise new ways to protect their vision. As they labored, Sarah found herself reflecting on how far she had come, from a shy girl tinkering with radios in Texas to a CEO steering a company through its darkest hour. But there was no time for nostalgia. Every moment demanded action. Then came the unexpected, an invitation to a confidential industry summit in Los Angeles. It was an opportunity to showcase Novatech's new security measures and innovation in front of influential figures and potential partners. Sarah saw it as a chance not only to regain credibility but to assert that Novatech was stronger than ever. The summit was held in a sleek, glass-walled conference center overlooking the Pacific, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside Sarah. She arrived early, nerves buzzing beneath her composed exterior. The crowd was a mix of tech moguls, investors, journalists, and potential clients. Each handshake and smile masked a world of judgment and expectation. As Sarah took the stage to present Novatech's new features, she felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. She spoke with passion and conviction about the company's mission to create genuine connections through technology, about the lessons learned from recent setbacks, and the renewed commitment to security and transparency. The audience responded with cautious optimism, their applause a tentative but vital lifeline. After the presentation, Sarah mingled among the crowd, fielding questions and forging new alliances. It was during this time that she crossed paths with Marcus Kane, a charismatic entrepreneur with a reputation for turning struggling companies into industry leaders. Marcus was sharp, confident, and intriguing, a man who saw potential where others saw problems. He offered insights and advice that resonated with Sarah's vision, and a partnership was discussed that could catapult Novatech into a new league. But Marcus's interest wasn't without strings. His approach was aggressive, pushing for rapid expansion and risky moves that clashed with Sarah's cautious optimism. The tension between them hinted at the difficult decisions ahead. How much of her vision was Sarah willing to compromise to save the company? Amid the summit's whirlwind, Sarah received a message from Emma. It was brief but haunting. "We need to talk. I have information that can help." The words stirred a mix of hope and dread. Could Emma still be part of the solution, or was this another twist in an already tangled story? Sarah hesitated but decided to meet Emma in a quiet cafe away from prying eyes. The reunion was charged with emotion. Emma was changed, tired, remorseful, and desperate to make amends. She revealed that the leak was part of a larger scheme orchestrated by a competitor who had manipulated her desperation for quick money. Emma had been a pawn, not the mastermind. This revelation shifted the narrative again, casting Sarah's former friend in a new light. The meeting was bittersweet. Forgiveness was not immediate, and trust had to be rebuilt slowly, but Sarah recognized the courage it took for Emma to come forward. Back at Novatech, armed with Emma's information, Sarah and her team launched a counter-investigation. The process was grueling, uncovering layers of deception and corporate espionage that threatened not only Novatech but the integrity of the industry itself. Sarah's leadership shone brightest in these moments, her ability to unite her team, keep focus amid chaos, and navigate the murky waters of betrayal and recovery. As weeks passed, Novatech emerged stronger. Security was tighter, partnerships more strategic, and the product more refined. The scars from the past remained, but they served as reminders of resilience and growth. Sarah's relationship with Emma, while still fragile, evolved into a cautious alliance, a testament to the complexity of human connections. The summit was a turning point, not just for Novatech but for Sarah personally. She realized that leadership wasn't about perfection but about perseverance, about facing adversity head-on and making difficult choices with integrity and courage. The journey was far from over, but Sarah Carter had proven she could navigate the storm. As she looked out over the city from her apartment balcony, the lights shimmering like distant stars, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. One bad friend had tested her, nearly destroyed her dream, but in the end, it was the strength of her spirit and the support of those who believed in her that would define her legacy. The road ahead was uncertain, but Sarah was ready to walk it, stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. The morning sun filtered through the blinds of Sarah's apartment, casting long shadows across her desk cluttered with reports, emails, and half-empty coffee mugs. The city outside buzzed with its usual chaos, but inside, Sarah felt a rare stillness, a calm before the storm she sensed brewing beneath the surface. For months, Novatech had been fighting its way back from the brink, weathering betrayals, cyber attacks, and fractured trust. Yet despite the progress, an unspoken tension lingered, one Sarah couldn't ignore. Today was the day of the board meeting that would decide Novatech's future, whether the company would secure critical funding or face collapse. Sarah sat in her chair, fingers lightly tapping the polished wood, heart pounding with a mixture of hope and dread. She reviewed the presentation one last time, each slide a testament to the blood, sweat, and tears poured into this fight. The office was buzzing with nervous energy when Sarah arrived. Her team gathered around, faces reflecting exhaustion but also a steely determination. David was by her side, calm and steady, a reminder that she wasn't alone in this battle. Emma was there too, her presence a quiet but powerful symbol of the complicated journey they had endured together. As the boardroom doors closed, Sarah took a deep breath and stepped into the spotlight. The room was filled with powerful voices, investors, advisors, skeptics, all weighing the fate of Novatech. Sarah's voice was steady as she outlined their renewed strategy, highlighting the strengthened security protocols, the innovations in user experience, and the hard-won lessons that had transformed the company's culture. She spoke not just as a CEO but as a woman who had faced betrayal, doubt, and fear, and emerged stronger. The presentation flowed, punctuated by pointed questions and skeptical glances. When the floor opened for discussion, tensions rose. Some board members expressed concern over the financial risks, others doubted the team's ability to execute after such turmoil. Sarah felt the weight of their doubt but refused to falter. Then came the moment that would define the meeting. Emma stood, her voice steady but emotional, sharing her story, her mistakes, her regrets, and her commitment to making things right. The room fell silent, the raw honesty cutting through the tension. Sarah watched as the board members absorbed the human side of the crisis, seeing beyond numbers and charts to the real people fighting for a dream. The vote was called. Sarah's heart raced as the boardroom awaited the decision. One by one, hands rose in support, some tentative, others resolute. The final tally was a lifeline. Novatech would receive the funding needed to move forward. Relief and gratitude washed over Sarah, mingling with a deep sense of responsibility. The fight was far from over, but this victory was a turning point. That evening, as the city lights flickered outside her window, Sarah allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She reflected on the twists and turns of her journey, the betrayals that cut deep, the friendships tested, and the strength discovered in the darkest hours. She thought of Emma, who had come back from the edge, and David, whose unwavering support had been a beacon. Sarah realized that leadership wasn't just about strategy or vision. It was about humanity, embracing imperfection, extending forgiveness, and finding hope in the face of adversity. Her phone buzzed with a message from James Reynolds, "Proud of you, Sarah. This is just the beginning." A small smile touched her lips. Life was unpredictable, full of surprises and setbacks, but love and trust, when nurtured carefully, could lead the way. Sarah knew the road ahead would still have challenges, but she was ready to face them with an open heart and unwavering determination. The emotional climax of her journey was not just about saving a company, it was about rediscovering the power of resilience, forgiveness, and the unbreakable human spirit. And with that, Sarah stepped forward into a future she was ready to build, one strengthened by lessons learned, friendships tested, and a dream that refused to die. Sarah sat quietly in the small cafe near her apartment, the soft hum of conversations and the clink of coffee cups around her offering a gentle backdrop to her thoughts. It had been months since the board meeting that saved Novatech, yet the journey still felt like a winding road with twists she hadn't fully anticipated. The company was stabilizing, the product evolving, and investors were finally beginning to believe in her vision again. But more importantly, Sarah was learning something profound about life, friendship, and herself. She reflected on the roller coaster of emotions she had endured, from the crushing betrayal by Emma to the steady support of David, the fierce guidance of James, and the unwavering love of her brother Michael. Each relationship had shaped her, teaching her that trust was fragile yet essential and that forgiveness wasn't a weakness but a courageous act of strength. Emma had returned to the team, slowly rebuilding trust one honest conversation at a time. Their friendship was different now, marked by a cautious but sincere respect. Sarah realized that one bad friend could indeed shake your world, but that didn't mean all connections were destined to crumble. Sometimes, broken bonds could be mended, stronger and wiser than before. David remained a steadfast ally, his quiet confidence a reminder that partnership and support were as crucial as ambition. Together, they fostered a culture at Novatech where transparency and empathy were valued as much as innovation and results. Sarah's leadership style had evolved. She was no longer just the driven CEO but a mentor, a listener, and a beacon for her team. The lessons extended beyond business. Sarah found herself opening up to Michael more, sharing not just triumphs but fears and doubts she had kept hidden. Their bond deepened, a testament to family's enduring power to heal and inspire. In quiet moments, Sarah would think back to those nights as a child when they dreamed of a future full of possibility, dreams now slowly coming true. As Novatech's user base grew, Sarah took time to connect personally with users, hearing their stories and understanding how technology could foster genuine human connections. This reminded her of why she started the company in the first place, not just for success, but to make a meaningful difference. The city skyline shimmered outside her window as Sarah wrote in her journal, capturing the reflections that had crystallized over the past months. She understood now that life was unpredictable, filled with moments of joy and pain intertwined. But through it all, love, whether from family, friends, or even oneself, was the force that could guide you through darkness. Sarah's journey was a testament to resilience and growth, a reminder that even when faced with betrayal and hardship, it was possible to rise, rebuild, and create something beautiful. Her story was not just about surviving a bad friend but about learning how to trust again, how to lead with heart, and how to embrace the imperfect, messy, and wonderful nature of life. With a deep breath, Sarah closed her journal and looked ahead with hope. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready, stronger, wiser, and more compassionate than ever before. The dawn broke over the city with a soft golden glow, casting long shadows across the streets below. Sarah stood by the window of her apartment, coffee in hand, watching the city come alive as people hustled to start their day. The weight of the past months had eased, replaced by a cautious optimism that settled deep in her chest. Novatech was on the mend, the team energized and focused on innovation, and investors were beginning to see the potential Sarah always believed in. But this chapter of her life wasn't just about the company, it was about her own transformation, and the new horizons that awaited. Sarah had learned the hard way that trust was a precious commodity, easily broken and painstakingly rebuilt. Emma's return had been complicated, their friendship was no longer the same, but it had evolved into something more honest. The betrayal left scars, yet it also opened the door to forgiveness and understanding. Sarah knew she would never forget the pain Emma caused, but she had chosen to believe in redemption, a decision that required more courage than she had ever imagined. The office buzzed with renewed energy as Sarah arrived that morning. The team gathered around, eager to share ideas and updates. The setbacks had forged a tighter bond among them, a sense of unity born from shared struggle. Sarah felt pride swell inside her, not just for the company's progress, but for the people who had stood by her side through it all. David Matthews was there as always, his calm presence a steadying force amidst the whirlwind. Together, they planned the next steps for Novatech's growth, focusing on user experience, security, and expanding their market reach. But Sarah also knew that innovation required risk, and the path ahead would demand difficult choices. That afternoon, she met with Marcus Kane again, the enigmatic entrepreneur who had first approached her at the summit. Marcus's vision for rapid expansion was tempting, promising faster growth and larger impact. Yet his aggressive style clashed with Sarah's values of sustainable, thoughtful leadership. Their discussions were charged with tension, a battle between ambition and caution. Sarah wrestled with the question, how far was she willing to compromise her principles to save Novatech? Meanwhile, Sarah's personal life began to open up in unexpected ways. Her brother Michael had returned from his business trip, bringing a fresh perspective and renewed encouragement. They spent evenings talking late into the night, sharing dreams and fears, rediscovering the deep bond that had sustained them through childhood and now adulthood. Michael's unwavering belief in Sarah reminded her that family was a source of strength she could always rely on. As weeks passed, Sarah also reconnected with old friends, seeking balance beyond the relentless pace of her work. She realized how much she had isolated herself during the crisis, driven by the fear of betrayal and failure. Slowly, she opened up, allowing herself to trust and lean on others in new ways. This personal growth paralleled Novatech's ascent, a journey from chaos to clarity, from isolation to connection. One evening, Sarah found herself at a community event showcasing new tech startups. Walking through the crowd, she felt a surge of inspiration from the innovative spirit around her. It reminded her why she had started this journey, not just to build a company, but to create technology that brought people together, fostered empathy, and made life better. This vision was the compass guiding her through the complexities of leadership and life. Back at Novatech, the team unveiled a major update to their platform, incorporating advanced security features and user-friendly design. The launch was met with positive reviews, signaling a turning point that validated their hard work and resilience. Sarah's heart swelled with gratitude for the team's dedication and the community's support. The future was still uncertain, but the foundation was strong. Throughout it all, Sarah kept returning to the lessons learned from her ordeal with Emma. She understood now that one bad friend could indeed threaten everything, but it was also possible to grow beyond the pain. Forgiveness was a process, not a destination, and trust had to be earned again, step by careful step. This realization shaped how she approached every relationship moving forward, personal and professional alike. As night fell over the city, Sarah stood once more on her balcony, the cool breeze carrying the sense of summer and possibility. She felt a quiet strength within, a resolve to face whatever came next with integrity and heart. The journey had been difficult, filled with loss and betrayal, but also with growth and hope. She was no longer the same woman who had started Novatech. She was stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace the new horizons before her. With a deep breath, Sarah smiled. The future was hers to shape, and she was ready to lead, not just a company, but a life defined by resilience, love, and unshakable hope. The city's lights twinkled like distant stars as Sarah walked briskly down the bustling streets, her mind heavy with thoughts she could no longer ignore. Novatech's recovery was well underway, but shadows from the past lingered, ghosts that threatened to unravel the fragile piece she'd fought so hard to build. The memory of betrayal was a constant companion, reminding her that trust once broken was never easily restored. Emma's betrayal had been a wound, but there were deeper scars buried beneath, things Sarah hadn't yet faced. That evening, Sarah received a call from an old mentor, Dr. Karen Mitchell, a woman who had guided her through the earliest days of her career. Karen's voice was calm but urgent. "Sarah, there's something you need to know about the leak, something that could change everything." The word sent a chill down Sarah's spine. After months of healing, the past was knocking again, unrelenting and unexpected. Meeting Karen at a quiet, dimly lit cafe, Sarah listened intently as the mentor revealed a startling truth. The breach was not just a simple act of sabotage but part of a larger conspiracy involving powerful players who sought to undermine Novatech's innovation and dominance. The leak had been orchestrated to cripple the company and silence the disruptive technology that threatened entrenched interests. Sarah's heart pounded as the implications sank in. This was no longer just about a bad friend or corporate espionage, it was a battle against forces determined to maintain control at any cost. The revelation ignited a fire within Sarah. She knew that facing these enemies would require more than business acumen, it would demand courage, strategy, and allies she could trust. The challenge was daunting, but Sarah refused to be intimidated. She had rebuilt from ruin once and was ready to do it again. Back at Novatech, the atmosphere shifted. Sarah convened a discreet meeting with her closest team members, David, Emma, and a handful of trusted advisors. She shared the new intelligence, emphasizing the need for vigilance and discretion. The team's faces reflected a mixture of determination and concern. Trust had to be rebuilt within the company too, and now more than ever, unity was essential. Emma's role became even more complicated. Her knowledge of the inner workings of the sabotage was invaluable, but doubts about her loyalties lingered. Sarah struggled with conflicting emotions. Was Emma truly on their side, or was there still a chance she might falter? The past wasn't so easily erased, and the line between friend and foe blurred. As days turned to weeks, Novatech fortified its defenses both digitally and legally. Sarah met with cybersecurity experts, lawyers, and investigators, orchestrating a multi-front response to the threat. The pressure mounted, and sleepless nights became routine. Yet Sarah's resolve never wavered. She reminded herself that leadership meant standing tall even when the path was dark and uncertain. Meanwhile, the media caught wind of renewed tensions surrounding Novatech, fueling speculation and sensational headlines. Sarah learned to navigate the tricky dance of public relations, balancing transparency with the need to protect sensitive information. She became adept at projecting calm confidence, even when inside she grappled with fear and exhaustion. In quieter moments, Sarah reflected on how the events had shaped her. The past was a powerful teacher, exposing vulnerabilities but also revealing strength. She realized that forgiveness was important, but so was self-protection, knowing when to trust and when to guard her heart. One evening, after a grueling day of meetings, Sarah found herself at the old park where she used to play as a child. The familiar surroundings brought a sense of peace amid the turmoil. She sat on a bench, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple. It was a reminder that even the darkest days gave way to light. Her phone buzzed, a message from Michael. "Remember, you're not alone in this. We're stronger together." The simple words warmed her spirit, a reminder that no matter the shadows lurking, she had a support system willing to stand beside her. The battle ahead was daunting. Powerful enemies lurked in the shadows, seeking to dismantle everything Sarah had built. But armed with hard-earned wisdom, a loyal team, and an unbreakable spirit, Sarah was ready to face the storm. She rose from the bench, determination shining in her eyes. The past was a shadow, but it would not define her future. The fight for Novatech, and for her own redemption, had only just begun. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Sarah's life had become a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and late-night calls. Every day brought new challenges, each one testing her resolve and leadership in ways she never imagined. The shadows of the past still haunted her, but with every step forward, she was learning how to turn those fears into fuel for progress. Novatech's survival depended on more than just innovation, it required unshakable courage and a clear vision of the future. The latest revelation from Dr. Karen Mitchell about the orchestrated sabotage had set a new tone for Sarah's leadership. She understood that the battle extended beyond internal struggles and personal betrayals, it was a fight against a system resistant to change, against those who feared disruption. But Sarah was no longer willing to be a victim of circumstances. She decided it was time to take control, to move from defense to offense. Gathering her core team, Sarah laid out an aggressive plan to expose the conspiracy targeting Novatech. The strategy was bold: leverage public opinion through controlled leaks, strengthen cybersecurity defenses, and build alliances with other tech companies who shared their vision. It was a risky move, but Sarah knew that sometimes, calculated risk was the only way to break free from the chains of fear. David, ever the pragmatist, cautioned against going too far too fast. "We need to be smart about this, Sarah. One wrong move and we could lose everything we've rebuilt." Emma, whose journey had been fraught with redemption and doubt, offered a surprising perspective. "Sometimes, transparency is the best defense. If we show them we're not afraid, we take away their power." Their voices echoed the tension and hope threading through the team. Meanwhile, Sarah's relationship with Emma grew more complex. Trust was still fragile, but they found moments of honesty and collaboration that hinted at a new beginning. Sarah realized that leadership wasn't just about making decisions, it was about embracing imperfection, learning from mistakes, and giving others the chance to grow alongside you. In the midst of the turmoil, Sarah took time to reconnect with her family. Michael's unwavering support was a balm to her weary soul, reminding her that no matter how high the stakes, she was never truly alone. Their late-night talks became a source of strength and clarity, grounding Sarah in values that had always guided her. One afternoon, Sarah met with a coalition of tech innovators and advocates who were equally committed to fostering ethical innovation and protecting user privacy. The meeting was inspiring, filled with passionate voices and ideas that reignited Sarah's belief in the power of community and shared purpose. Together, they drafted a manifesto for responsible technology. A declaration of principles that would guide their companies in the face of increasing threats. Back at Novatech, the team worked tirelessly to implement the new cybersecurity protocols. Nights blurred into days as developers patched vulnerabilities and testers probed the system for weaknesses. Sarah often found herself in the war room, surrounded by glowing monitors and focused faces, feeling the pulse of determination that kept the company alive. The turning point came unexpectedly. A major investor, previously skeptical and cautious, publicly endorsed Novatech's vision and commitment to transparency. The endorsement sparked a wave of positive media coverage, shifting the narrative from scandal to resilience. Sarah felt a surge of hope, a sign that the tide was beginning to turn. But with hope came new challenges. The conspirators were not idle, their attacks became more sophisticated, aiming to undermine the company's credibility and financial stability. Sarah knew the battle was far from over. Yet, she also knew that every obstacle was an opportunity, to learn, to grow, and to prove that one bad friend or one dark chapter could never define her story. One evening, as the city lights shimmered outside her office window, Sarah sat alone reflecting on the journey. The path had been treacherous, filled with heartbreak and doubt, but also with moments of profound growth and connection. She understood now that success was not just about achieving goals but about the courage to face adversity with grace and integrity. Her phone buzzed, a message from Emma: "We're stronger than they think. Let's finish this." A small smile crept across Sarah's face. Together, they would fight not just for Novatech's survival, but for a future where innovation could thrive free from fear and betrayal. Sarah stood, feeling the weight of the past lift slightly as a new determination settled within. The turning point had come. Not just for her company, but for her own journey as a leader, a friend, and a woman who refused to be broken. The battle to save Novatech was intensifying, and with it came the hard truths about who could be trusted, and who might still harbor secrets. Sarah felt the pressure mounting not just from external threats, but from the fragile alliances within her own circle. In the high-stakes world of tech startups, loyalty was a currency more valuable than money, yet often as fragile as glass. Every decision carried weight, and every relationship was tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. The fallout from the sabotage had left the team shaken, and while some bonds had grown stronger, others showed cracks. Sarah found herself questioning not just Emma's allegiance, but the motives of others around her. The fear of betrayal lurked in every glance, every whispered conversation. Yet Sarah knew she couldn't afford paranoia. She needed clarity and trust, or Novatech would crumble under the strain. One afternoon, Sarah discovered discrepancies in the company's internal communications, encrypted messages that suggested someone was feeding information to rival firms. The revelation sent a shockwave through her. Who among her trusted team could be a traitor? The thought was almost unbearable. Sarah wrestled with disbelief and determination. She had to find the truth without destroying the fragile unity they had rebuilt. David stepped forward with a plan. His experience in crisis management became invaluable as he suggested discreet investigations and tighter security protocols. "We have to act smart, Sarah. If we accuse without proof, we risk destroying morale," he warned. Emma, still seeking redemption, volunteered to help with the internal audit, hoping to prove her loyalty through action. The tension inside Novatech was palpable. Team members worked harder than ever, but a cloud of suspicion hung over their daily routines. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility crushing her at times, but she refused to let fear dictate her decisions. She reminded herself of the lessons learned from the past: forgiveness and vigilance must coexist, and leadership required both strength and compassion. As the investigation unfolded, Sarah's own resolve was tested in unexpected ways. A trusted advisor, someone she had relied on since the early days, was implicated in the leaks. The betrayal cut deep, reopening old wounds. Sarah confronted the advisor in a private meeting, the room thick with unspoken pain and disappointment. The confrontation was painful but necessary, a moment that defined Sarah's growth. She maintained professionalism while making it clear that betrayal would not be tolerated. Meanwhile, Emma's efforts to rebuild trust took on new urgency. She spearheaded initiatives to increase transparency within the company, organizing open forums where team members could voice concerns and ask questions. The atmosphere began to shift as employees felt heard and involved in the company's future. Sarah watched with cautious hope as Emma transformed from a symbol of past betrayal to a leader advocating for unity. Outside the walls of Novatech, the corporate war escalated. Rivals launched aggressive marketing campaigns aimed at discrediting Novatech's innovations, while cyber attacks probed for weaknesses. Sarah had to navigate this treacherous landscape with strategic finesse, balancing defensive measures with bold moves to reclaim the narrative. In the midst of the chaos, Sarah found moments of solace with Michael and David. Their unwavering support reminded her that loyalty was not just a concept but a lived reality. Late-night conversations and quiet gestures sustained her, offering the emotional anchor she desperately needed. One evening, as Sarah reviewed the latest security reports, her phone buzzed with a message from Emma: "We found the source. Ready to act." The relief was overwhelming. Together, they moved swiftly to contain the breach and reinforce defenses. The decisive action marked a turning point, demonstrating that even the darkest betrayals could be overcome with courage and teamwork. Sarah understood now that loyalty was complex and tested by fire, but it was also the foundation of every meaningful relationship, personal and professional alike. She resolved to lead with both firmness and empathy, knowing that true strength came from embracing vulnerability without losing sight of her vision. As the city lights twinkled outside her window, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead remained challenging, but with her team united and her heart open, she was ready to face whatever tests came next. The battle for Novatech's future was far from over, but Sarah had learned that sometimes, the greatest victories came from surviving the storms within. Sarah felt the weight of the world pressing down like never before. Novatech was surviving, even showing signs of growth, but the relentless pressure was beginning to take its toll. Every decision felt like walking a tightrope. One misstep could send the company plunging back into chaos. The battle wasn't just external anymore, it was internal, a struggle within herself between exhaustion and determination. She wondered how much longer she could keep this pace before breaking. The weeks had blurred together into a whirlwind of meetings, strategic pivots, and sleepless nights. Sarah's body ached from stress, but it was the emotional strain that cut deepest. The betrayal, the conspiracies, the constant fear of another blow, it all weighed heavily on her spirit. Even her closest allies sensed the cracks forming beneath her steadfast exterior. David noticed the fatigue in her eyes and gently urged her to take a step back. "You can't pour from an empty cup, Sarah," he reminded her. But stepping back felt impossible. The company was at a crucial juncture. The latest round of funding was uncertain, with investors demanding faster results and greater assurances of security. Sarah faced mounting pressure to prove Novatech's worth, not just as a tech innovator but as a resilient leader in a cutthroat industry. The demands were relentless, and the stakes higher than ever. Meanwhile, Emma's progress toward redemption had stalled. Old doubts resurfaced among the team, fueled by whispers and skepticism. Sarah wrestled with her own conflicted feelings. Wanting to believe Emma had changed but haunted by memories of betrayal. The tension between them simmered beneath the surface, threatening to boil over. One evening, after a long day, Sarah received devastating news: a major client had pulled out, citing concerns about stability. The loss was a blow not just financially but emotionally. It was a reminder that the past mistakes still shadowed every move forward. The weight of responsibility pressed down harder, and Sarah felt the first sharp pangs of despair. Yet, even at this breaking point, Sarah refused to surrender. She reached out to Michael, whose steady presence grounded her. Their late-night conversations became lifelines, reminding her of the values that had driven her from the beginning: resilience, integrity, and the belief that setbacks were temporary. Michael encouraged her to see this not as an end, but a challenge to rise from. Back at the office, Sarah gathered her team for a candid meeting. She shared the news of the lost client with honesty, refusing to sugarcoat the reality but also calling on everyone's strength to rally. The room was heavy with tension, but Sarah's vulnerability sparked something unexpected, a collective determination to fight harder. Emma stepped forward, proposing innovative solutions to win back trust and attract new clients. Her initiative surprised many and hinted at genuine growth. Sarah also began to prioritize self-care, acknowledging that leadership was not just about endurance but balance. She carved out moments for rest, reflection, and connection, understanding that her well-being was essential to Novatech's future. This shift wasn't easy, but it brought clarity and renewed energy. Amid the crisis, Sarah received an invitation to speak at a prestigious tech conference. It was an opportunity to share Novatech's story and vision, to reclaim their narrative on a grand stage. Preparing for the speech, Sarah poured her heart into the message, about resilience, trust, and the power of perseverance. It was more than a business pitch, it was a declaration of hope. The day of the conference arrived, and Sarah stood before an audience of industry leaders, investors, and innovators. As she spoke, she felt the fear and doubt dissolve, replaced by a fierce conviction. Her story of overcoming betrayal, fighting shadowy forces, and rebuilding from the brink resonated deeply. The applause was thunderous, and Sarah knew this was a turning point, not just for Novatech, but for herself. Returning home that evening, Sarah reflected on the journey so far. The breaking point had been terrifying, but it had also been transformative. She had learned that strength was not the absence of struggle but the courage to face it head-on. The path ahead was still uncertain, but Sarah was no longer afraid. She was ready to lead with heart and grit, knowing that true victory came from rising stronger after every fall. The first snow of the season dusted the streets outside Novatech's headquarters, softening the hard lines of the city and bringing a stillness that contrasted the storm Sarah felt gathering again. Despite the victories, exposing the mole, rallying the team, and reclaiming part of their reputation, Sarah sensed that they were only at the eye of the hurricane. The next phase of Novatech's evolution wasn't just about surviving attacks. It was about building something unshakable, something no shadowy force or internal division could break. And to do that, Sarah knew she couldn't do it alone. News of her speech at the tech conference had reverberated through the industry. Messages poured in from other founders, entrepreneurs, and tech leaders, many of them women, who had faced similar struggles. Sarah read their words late into the night, stories of betrayal, burnout, rebuilding. They weren't just congratulating her, they were looking to her for leadership. She felt honored, and deeply responsible. One message in particular caught her eye. It was from Amina Caldwell, CEO of a competing AI startup known for its cutting-edge algorithms and fiercely loyal user base. Amina had built her company from the ground up, facing sexism, skepticism, and lawsuits from legacy firms along the way. Her message was simple: your fight is our fight. Want to talk? Sarah met Amina for coffee the following week, unsure of what to expect. But from the moment they sat down, it was clear there was something more than mutual respect between them, there was alignment. Both had battled institutional resistance, misinformation campaigns, and ruthless competitors. They shared a vision of a tech industry grounded in integrity, transparency, and innovation. It wasn't long before conversation turned from experiences to strategy. Amina proposed something bold. An alliance between Novatech and her company, MindSpring. Not a merger, but a collaborative effort to develop open-source tools that would set new standards for user privacy and security, tools their competitors couldn't ignore. We can do more together than apart, Amina said. This industry only changes when someone makes the first move. Sarah was intrigued but cautious. The timing was risky. Novatech was still healing, and joining forces with another company would invite scrutiny and possibly push some investors away. Yet, Sarah couldn't deny the energy she felt during that conversation. For the first time in months, she felt inspired not just to fight back, but to lead forward. After a week of internal debate, long conversations with David and Michael, and input from the board, Sarah agreed. The alliance would move forward, quietly at first, then publicly once the foundation was set. Emma, ever eager to prove her value, took charge of the integration team, working closely with Amina's developers to bridge the two platforms. David negotiated the legal framework, ensuring both companies maintained independence while sharing resources and data protection protocols. The news, once it broke, hit the industry like a lightning strike. While some critics called it a desperate move, others hailed it as revolutionary. Sarah and Amina released a joint video statement that emphasized collaboration over competition, ethics over ego. The message resonated. A wave of new users signed up for Novatech, impressed by their transparency and refusal to play the traditional cutthroat game. But success always brought attention, and not all of it was welcome. The very same forces that had tried to sabotage Novatech months ago returned with renewed aggression. Smear campaigns popped up online, falsely accusing the new alliance of stealing data and compromising user privacy. A prominent senator with ties to legacy tech firms called for an inquiry. Headlines questioned whether Sarah was getting in over her head. For every step forward, it seemed, someone was trying to pull her back. Sarah refused to be rattled. She'd been through worse. She called a full team meeting, standing in front of the entire company and telling them the truth, that what they were building was worth every attack, and that courage meant staying the course even when the ground shook beneath you. "We're not just defending Novatech," she said. "We're defending a future where technology doesn't exploit people. If that makes enemies, good. That means we're doing something right." It wasn't just words. Sarah began meeting with regulators, privacy advocates, and university researchers, inviting transparency into their practices. She understood now that building trust wasn't just about securing code, it was about showing the world how things worked, and proving they had nothing to hide. The culture at Novatech began to shift. People felt empowered, not just as workers, but as architects of something larger. One evening, as Sarah reviewed progress reports, she got a call from James Reynolds. His voice was calm, but urgent. "I've been watching," he said. "You're making real moves. That's why they're getting louder. You're changing the game." James had once advised her from a distance, but now his tone was different, like an equal. He offered to connect her with a network of independent investors and technologists tired of the old guard's grip. "They want to build what you're building," he said. "And they know the cost." Sarah agreed. This wasn't just about one company anymore. It was about shifting an entire culture. The alliance with Mindspring became the first of many. Smaller startups began reaching out, asking to be part of what they now called the Accord, a loose, transparent coalition committed to ethical technology, data dignity, and shared progress. At the heart of it all was Sarah, once nearly destroyed by a friend's betrayal, now standing as a symbol of resilience, conviction, and hope. She often thought back to the quiet moment in her apartment months ago, when everything felt lost. What had pushed her forward then? It wasn't ambition, or ego. It was a single, clear belief, that the truth was worth fighting for, even when it hurt. In the late hours of that night, after the calls and emails were done, Sarah looked out her window again, snowflakes falling silently on the city below. She thought about her team. About Emma, rebuilding herself piece by piece. About David, still quietly holding the seams together. About Michael, whose voice had guided her through the darkest nights. And she thought about Amina, a new friend forged in fire. Sarah knew there would be more storms ahead. But for the first time, she didn't feel like she was fighting alone. The tide was turning. Not just for Novatech, but for the future of everything they believed in. Winter deepened, casting a gray hush over the city, but inside Novatech, things were far from still. The coalition with Mindspring had sparked both admiration and fury. What Sarah and Amina were building, a united front of companies that prioritized ethics over profits, was no longer a whispered hope in backchannels. It was real, it was public, and it was growing fast. But for every startup eager to join their movement, there were 10 competitors or gatekeepers ready to crush it. Sarah could feel the pressure mounting with every email, every headline, every new attempt to dig up dirt from her past. On a bitter Tuesday morning, Novatech was hit with a full-scale media assault. An anonymous whistleblower claimed the company had covered up a data breach 6 months earlier, accusing Sarah and her leadership of hiding user information leaks. The accusation was not just false, it was designed to wound. The timing was too perfect, the tone too familiar. Someone powerful had orchestrated the story to land just as the accord gained momentum. Within hours, it was the top story on every business site. Hashtags trended. The story caught fire. Sarah read the headline in silence, Novatech integrity in question, whistleblower alleges cover-up. She didn't speak for a full minute. Then, slowly, she stood up, walked into the war room, and called an emergency meeting. Her voice didn't shake as she addressed the senior staff. We're not going to panic. We're going to investigate, document the truth, and fight back. David immediately began tracing the leak, coordinating with legal and security teams to piece together what had really happened. Within hours, they confirmed what Sarah already suspected, there was no breach, and there never had been. The documents provided to the press were forged. The so-called whistleblower didn't exist. It was all fabricated. But that didn't stop the damage. Investors paused their funding discussions. Partnership meetings were postponed. One major tech news outlet ran an op-ed titled, Novatech and the Dangers of Self-Righteous Innovation. Sarah felt the familiar weight of being disbelieved, even when the truth was on her side. It was the same feeling she had experienced after Emma's betrayal, that sickening sense of being wrongfully accused, watched by people eager to see her fall. This time, though, she had more than just her instincts, she had allies. Amina flew in from DC the next morning. They're trying to scare us into quitting, she said bluntly as she dropped her coat in Sarah's office. It's working, on them. Not on us. Emma, too, became a surprising voice of reason. I know what it's like to lie and get caught, she said during a leadership call. This doesn't smell like guilt. It smells like desperation, from whoever's trying to stop us. It was the first time Sarah looked at Emma and didn't feel the sting of the past. Maybe redemption was real. Maybe people could change. Sarah decided that instead of issuing a defensive press release, they'd go on offense. Within 24 hours, she recorded a video, simple, direct, unfiltered. Sitting at her desk, looking straight into the camera, she explained what had happened. She showed evidence of the forgery. She acknowledged Novatech's past mistakes but doubled down on their mission. We will never stop fighting for a tech future that serves people, not profits, she said. And if telling the truth means we get attacked, so be it. The video went viral. Not because it was polished, but because it was real. It resonated with people who were tired of spin, tired of CEOs hiding behind lawyers and PR statements. Comments poured in. Thousands of them. Support, solidarity, stories from around the country. People didn't just want better tech, they wanted leaders who would stand in the storm and not flinch. Still, the heat didn't die down. An aggressive faction of corporate lobbyists called for formal investigations. Old interviews of Sarah were clipped out of context and shared as proof that she had always been unstable, ambitious, or too emotional to lead. It was the classic playbook used to discredit women in power, paint her as erratic, question her character, then sit back and watch the chaos. Sarah knew it was a firestorm. But she also knew she'd been here before, and survived worse. She kept showing up. To work. To public forums. To late-night calls with coalition partners. She sent handwritten notes to her staff, thanking them for staying strong. She began mentoring younger startup founders in the Accord, knowing that her story was now part of something larger. Sarah had realized the only way to beat back a system built on fear was with community and visibility. Behind the scenes, David and Emma had tracked the source of the forgery to a shell company linked to a well-known competitor, a firm that had publicly criticized Novatech's open-source model just weeks earlier. The paper trail was messy but undeniable. The team debated whether to go public or handle it legally. Sarah made the call, released the proof. With precision and care, they drafted a public report, linking the attacks to their source, detailing the effort to smear Novatech with forgeries and lies. The internet erupted. The narrative flipped in a matter of hours. Now, the conversation wasn't about whether Sarah could be trusted, it was about the lengths others would go to stop progress. News outlets apologized. The competitor's leadership went silent. Sarah's message had landed, not just because she had evidence, but because she had never stopped telling the truth. Later that night, Sarah sat alone in her apartment, the buzz of notifications still echoing through her phone. Outside, snow still fell. The firestorm had tested her, burned her at the edges. But it hadn't destroyed her. She felt tired, yes, but also more certain than ever. She thought back to something Michael had said weeks ago, they come for people who build. You must be doing something right. The world hadn't changed overnight. But it had seen something it couldn't unsee, an honest leader refusing to break, a company refusing to bend, and a growing movement that believed tech could still be good. Sarah took one final look at her laptop, closed it, and exhaled deeply. She wasn't finished yet. Not even close. Sarah woke the next morning to an inbox full of meeting requests, not the panicked, urgent kind she had grown used to, but thoughtful, forward-looking invitations. Universities wanted her to speak. Nonprofits wanted her to partner. And most unexpectedly, the Senate Technology Ethics Committee requested her presence at a hearing. The message was short, formal, and clear. Novatech's influence had reached Washington, and they wanted to hear from her directly. This wasn't a threat. This was an opportunity. But it was also a trap, at least potentially. Sarah knew that stepping into a government hearing would place her under a national microscope. The firestorm had blown over for now, but all it would take was one misstep, one poorly phrased sentence, to reignite it. Her advisors were split. David urged caution, if they're looking for a scapegoat, don't volunteer. Emma, surprisingly, pushed for a bold move, if you don't show up, they'll control the story. If you do, you might take control of it. After a long, quiet walk through the city, Sarah made her decision. She would go. She would not shrink back into the shadows just because the stage was bigger. Novatech had earned its seat at the table, and she wasn't about to let someone else speak for her company, or for the growing movement she now represented. Preparation for the hearing consumed the next 10 days. The Novatech legal team drilled her with mock questions, worst-case scenarios, and policy points. Amina sent over her own notes, reminding Sarah to focus not on what the senators wanted to hear, but on what the public needed to. They're watching for strength, she said. But real strength is clarity. If they see your spine and your heart, they'll have nothing left to criticize. Sarah arrived in D.C. under gray skies, her breath visible as she stepped into the Capitol. A sea of journalists lined the steps, calling her name, asking if she believed tech could be ethical, if she was afraid of perjury, if Novatech was really as clean as it claimed. She didn't flinch. Her black coat cut sharply through the cold, and her words were measured. We're not perfect, she said, pausing for effect. But we are honest. That's more than I can say for some of our critics. Inside the hearing room, the energy was tense and expectant. The room was packed, aides, press, tech insiders, and a few curious citizens who had followed Novatech's rise. Sarah took her seat calmly at the center of the long table, the company nameplate in front of her like a silent badge of survival. The questioning started with pleasantries, then quickly turned into pointed probes. One senator asked about Novatech's hiring practices. Another pressed her on past security breaches, and yet another demanded she explain why users should trust an AI company at all. Sarah answered every question with a mixture of professionalism and fire. She didn't dodge. She didn't sugarcoat. And most importantly, she didn't let the narrative be hijacked. "I'm not here to defend every line of code or every employee," she said at one point. "I'm here to say that we believe in accountability. That's why we're open source. That's why we welcome audits. That's why we exposed a conspiracy to smear our company instead of settling quietly like others might have. If that's threatening, maybe it's because too much of this industry has grown comfortable in the dark." Gasps rippled through the room. Even some senators leaned forward. Sarah didn't blink. When the hearing ended, a few members of the committee came up to shake her hand. Not everyone agreed with her, but they respected her. That mattered. And outside, the media was already painting the moment not as a trial, but as a statement, a leader who had walked into the lion's den and come out stronger. Back in San Francisco, the team welcomed her with quiet applause. Emma had decorated her office with a small note taped to her monitor: "You showed them what we stand for. Proud to fight beside you." Sarah sat for a moment, breathing in the stillness of her office. For once, the walls didn't feel like they were closing in. But the celebration was short-lived. Just 2 days later, another storm arrived, not external this time, but internal. A group of Novatech engineers, some of the most talented ones, announced they were leaving. Not in anger, not in protest, but in pursuit of something else. They wanted to build their own platform, one that aligned with Novatech's values but focused more narrowly on medical AI. "You inspired us," their spokesperson said. "You showed us we could build something better. We want to try." Sarah felt a complex wave of emotions: pride, sadness, and a twinge of fear. Losing key talent was never easy, especially in a competitive market. But she remembered something James Reynolds had once said: "A good leader builds great companies. A great leader builds people who outgrow them." So instead of pushing back or trying to convince them to stay, Sarah offered her support. "Let us know how we can help. If you carry the mission forward, then Novatech wins, too." It wasn't a loss. It was an evolution. Novatech wasn't just a company anymore. It was a seed. To keep momentum, Sarah made a bold decision: she would open Novatech's internal ethics committee to the public. Users, developers, and even critics could apply to join quarterly discussions about the platform's policies, decisions, and future. Transparency wouldn't just be a buzzword, it would be policy. David was nervous. "That's radical, Sarah. That's handing the microphone to people who might not like us." But Sarah had never been more certain. If we only listen to people who like us, we're no better than the companies we're trying to replace. Public response was overwhelming. Thousands applied. The media, still riding the wave of her Senate appearance, now dubbed Sarah the conscience of Silicon Valley. Investors who had once hesitated began to return, not just because of profit projections, but because they wanted to be associated with something real. Michael, who had stood silently by her through every twist and turn, finally said what had been on his mind for weeks. "You've built more than a business, Sarah. You've built a belief system." But it wasn't all praise. The resistance remained. Old competitors rebranded themselves with new values, hoping to recapture the narrative. Lobbyists doubled their efforts to push legislation that would stall Novatech's open-source advantage. And still, trolls and critics filled comment sections with doubt and misinformation. Yet something had changed. Sarah no longer felt like she was defending herself at every turn. She was leading. Actively, boldly. The firestorms had refined her, not destroyed her. And the table she now sat at. She'd built part of it with her own hands. As the chapter closed on a year of unimaginable challenges, Sarah took a moment of solitude in the Novatech garden, a rooftop sanctuary they'd built for employees needing peace. She looked out at the skyline and whispered a truth she'd come to understand: we're not here just to disrupt. We're here to repair. And with that, she turned, ready for what came next. Spring arrived quietly, bringing with it a subtle sense of renewal. The cherry blossoms bloomed outside Novatech's headquarters, dotting the city streets with soft pinks and whites, a contrast to the sharp steel and glass of the tech world Sarah had grown to both love and challenge. It had been over a year since everything began, since the betrayal, the smear campaign, the public scrutiny, the fires she had walked through and refused to be consumed by. And now, things felt different. Still uncertain, still evolving, but undeniably changed. Novatech had weathered storms most startups never survived. And Sarah, once dismissed, doubted, nearly destroyed, was now considered one of the most trusted voices in ethical technology. But it wasn't the accolades that mattered most to her. It was the way her people walked the halls again, with pride, with purpose, with ownership. And it was the messages from users, from parents and teachers and developers across the country, who said Novatech made them believe in technology again. But as the company grew, so did the complexities. Scaling ethically was not just a technical challenge, it was a human one. Hiring policies, algorithm bias audits, partnerships with global organizations, all required deeper thought, clearer frameworks, and harder conversations. Sarah sat in on nearly every major decision, not because she didn't trust her team, but because she felt responsible for the soul of what they were building. One particular challenge arose from an unexpected place. A non-profit advocacy group, one that had previously praised Novatech, began raising questions about the unintended consequences of their AI's predictive models. Specifically, how the technology could be misused by third-party developers in countries with authoritarian regimes. The headlines were polite, but pointed: has Novatech done enough to prevent harm abroad? Sarah took the criticism seriously. She called an internal summit, inviting voices not just from Novatech, but from NGOs, digital rights activists, and community leaders. If we're building tech that travels the world, she said, then we owe the world more than good intentions. The summit was raw, honest, and at times difficult. Developers admitted they hadn't thought about certain use cases. Legal advisors debated responsibility versus liability. But amid the tension, there was growth. Solutions. The beginning of a new Novatech initiative. One that would include a global ethics board, international feedback mechanisms, and a commitment to local voices, global impact. Sarah knew it wasn't enough to respond to criticism. They had to build systems that anticipated it. Proactively, not defensively. And while some CEOs might have treated such criticism as an attack, Sarah embraced it as accountability. If no one's questioning us, she said to her team one morning, we're probably not doing anything meaningful. Emma, now leading the Public Impact Division, had transformed into a force of balance and clarity. Her past no longer defined her. In fact, her ability to speak honestly about mistakes, both hers and the company's, had made her indispensable. She and Sarah worked side by side, not as adversaries, but as aligned leaders. Trust rebuilt brick by brick. David remained the steady hand behind the curtain, helping expand Novatech's partnerships, negotiating a new venture with an education tech firm to bring AI tools to underserved classrooms across the Midwest. When asked why he stayed through all the turbulence, David simply said, because I believed in who we were before everyone else did. Michael, too, remained close. Though not officially part of Novatech's leadership, he became Sarah's most consistent confidant. He had seen her in every stage, exhausted, furious, triumphant, broken, and reborn. One night over dinner, he asked her a question that stayed with her for days: do you still want this? Or are you just carrying it because no one else can? Sarah didn't answer right away. How could she? Her life had become so entangled with Novatech that separating her own identity felt impossible. She had given everything to this company, her time, her sanity, her relationships. But slowly, she came to realize, yes, she still wanted this. But not in the same way. She didn't want to own it. She wanted to share it. With that in mind, she began working with the board on a plan to restructure Novatech's leadership model. Over the course of 3 months, they laid the groundwork for a shared governance system, empowering department leads, rotating advisory panels, and a commitment to never let power consolidate in any one hand again. She wasn't stepping back. She was stepping aside just enough to let others rise. And they did. One by one, leaders emerged, not just in title, but in mindset. People who weren't afraid to question, to disagree, to protect the core values even when profits dangled temptingly in the distance. Sarah found joy in watching it unfold. Less command, more collaboration. Less control, more culture. It was during this time that she got a surprising email, from the very first investor who had pulled out during the darkest days. It was brief. An apology. And an offer to reinvest. Sarah read it twice and smiled. Not out of vindication, but from understanding. The world was starting to catch up to what they had seen all along. But not every door had to reopen. Some, she let stay closed. On the anniversary of the first attack on Novatech, Sarah gave a speech, not to the public, but to her team. It wasn't streamed. It wasn't recorded. It was just for them. She stood on the same rooftop garden where she had often come to think, surrounded by the people who had carried this dream with her through every storm. She looked out over the crowd, her voice clear. A year ago, I thought this company might die. I thought I might lose everything. And in some ways, I did. I lost the illusion that one person could do it all. I lost the idea that doing good would ever be easy. But I gained something else. Something better. She paused. The breeze moved gently through the space, rustling the leaves. I gained a team. A family. A mission that doesn't depend on me, but lives in all of us. We've made mistakes. We've been lied about, underestimated, even targeted. But we never stopped showing up. And that's why we're still here. There was silence for a long moment, and then applause, real, raw, not just for Sarah, but for themselves. That night, she stood on the roof long after everyone had gone. The stars were faint above the city lights, but they were there. She took out her phone and scrolled through her first ever press release for Novatech, the one she had written 2 years ago in her studio apartment, when it was all still a dream. It was full of ambition, idealism, and awkward phrasing. She smiled. So much had changed. And yet, the final sentence remained true: we're building the future we want to live in, not just the one we're handed. As the wind picked up, Sarah whispered aloud the same words she had spoken to herself so many times before, but now with new meaning: keep going. Because she finally understood that the story of Novatech, her story, was never about one bad friend, one company, or one breakthrough. It was about the people who refused to give up, no matter how much the world tried to knock them down. And that story was just getting started. Despite the warmth of spring and the celebratory tone that had settled across Novatech, Sarah had learned, perhaps better than anyone, that peace was often just the space between battles. She felt it in the way her intuition nudged at her late at night, in the sudden sharpness behind some of the media questions, and in a whisper of caution from James Reynolds, who called her unprompted one morning. "They're regrouping," he said. "Not the ones who smear you publicly. The ones you don't see until they've already moved the pieces." Sarah didn't ask who they were. She already knew. The entrenched power players. The legacy firms who had built their empires on closed systems, user manipulation, and cozy backroom deals. They'd taken a hit with the rise of Novatech and the Accord. Their market share had slipped. Their influence had dimmed. But they weren't gone. They were watching. And waiting. Within weeks, strange things began happening. A string of cyberattacks. Low-level but clearly coordinated, hit multiple Accord member platforms. Minor glitches in payment processing. Bot-generated negative reviews. Leaked memos twisted into false scandals. All meant to shake confidence, sow mistrust, and fracture the alliances Sarah had helped create. One smaller company even folded under the pressure, its founder posting a farewell letter that read more like a warning: "We underestimated how far the old world would go to stop the new one." Sarah responded by calling a full Accord summit, an emergency gathering of the coalition's leaders, held not virtually, but in person, for the first time. They rented a quiet hotel conference floor in Chicago, choosing a neutral space, far from the pressure and noise of Silicon Valley. Amina helped coordinate it. David flew in to manage logistics. Emma, despite her new role, insisted on attending. "They need to see the scars to understand the stakes," she said. The summit was tense at first. Nervous founders. Distrust. Some whispered fears that Novatek's prominence had made them all targets. Others questioned whether the dream of ethical tech was even realistic anymore. Sarah let them speak, let the emotion air out. And then she stood, calm but fierce, and addressed them not as a CEO, but as someone who had bled for this cause. "They will not stop. Not because we're weak, but because we're working. You've all seen what happens when we link arms. When we share data, open source our defenses, pool our legal teams. We're not the problem, they are. And they're scared. That means we're close. Too close for them to ignore." There was silence, then nods, and then something deeper: conviction. The summit ended with a new resolution, binding but voluntary, where all Accord members agreed to share early warning signs of attacks and coordinate countermeasures. They called it the Lighthouse Protocol. It wasn't about retaliation, it was about resilience. When Sarah returned to Novatek, she found her staff re-energized. They had watched her take leadership to the national stage, to DC, to the coalition. Now, she was back in the trenches with them. No job too small, no risk too great. She spent her mornings with coders, her afternoons reviewing policy drafts, and her evenings coaching new startup founders joining the movement. Novatek wasn't just stable. It was thriving. And yet, beneath the surface, Sarah couldn't shake the sense that something big was coming. The next blow didn't come from outside. It came from a place she hadn't expected, a whistleblower from within the Accord itself. An anonymous blog post, backed by partial screenshots and audio snippets, claimed that several Accord companies, including a Novatek partner, were quietly selling anonymized user data to advertising brokers under the guise of research collaboration. The language was vague, the evidence partial, but the insinuation was explosive, that the very coalition built on ethics had cracks in its foundation. Overnight, headlines shifted. Is the Accord just another tech club? Transparency or PR? Novatek's ethical brand under fire again. Sarah's heart sank. She had believed in these partners, stood beside them, advocated for them. She needed to know the truth. She gathered her team for an emergency audit, not just of Novatek's data policies, but of every shared project and collaboration tied to Accord partners. Emma coordinated the response team, leading interviews with partner staff and external data consultants. David reached out to legal advisors across the network. Amina worked in parallel, conducting her own internal investigation. Trust had to be earned again, even among allies. After an exhaustive 2-week review, the findings were both relieving and disturbing. Novatek was clean, no unauthorized data exchanges, no ethical violations. But 3 smaller Accord firms had indeed signed ambiguous research partnerships with a global ad network known for its murky tracking tactics. The contracts didn't mention data resale explicitly, but the loopholes were clear. It was a betrayal, not of laws, but of principles. Sarah called an emergency Accord council. The room was quiet as she stood to speak. "I don't care if it was legal," she said. "It wasn't right. We are not going to become what we swore to fight. If we tolerate even one breach of trust, this whole thing falls apart. There was resistance. Some argued that survival in the market required compromise. Others claimed the media had twisted the facts. But Sarah refused to budge. If we don't hold each other accountable, they'll use this to destroy all of us. Ultimately, a vote was taken. The three companies were suspended from the accord pending full third-party review. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it sent a message: integrity wasn't optional. It was the cost of admission. The fallout was swift. The media story flipped again, this time portraying Sarah as a leader willing to police her own movement. Novatek's reputation soared. But Sarah didn't feel like celebrating. She felt something else, the weight of vigilance. Leading ethically wasn't just about building better systems. It was about constant maintenance. Moral upkeep. Hard choices. Late one night, after the council vote, Sarah sat with Michael on the roof again. They didn't speak for a long time. Then he asked, "Did you ever think it would get this big?" Sarah exhaled. "I thought we'd build something that mattered. I didn't think it would have to be defended like this." "You're doing more than defending," he said. "You're setting a new standard." She looked up at the stars, faint but steady. "I just don't want to lose the why in the noise." Michael leaned back, folding his hands behind his head. "You haven't. That's why they keep coming for you. Not because you're loud. Because you're right." As the city lights shimmered below, Sarah realized that her fight had never been just about Novatek. It had always been about what it represented, a different kind of power. The kind that didn't need secrecy or domination. The kind that built something others wanted to protect. And as the shadows gathered again at the edge of her world, she stood a little taller. She had not only survived the storm. She had become the lighthouse in it. The news broke at 6:37 a.m. Eastern Time. Sarah was just stepping into the Novatek lobby, coffee in hand, when David called from his apartment across town. His voice was clipped, serious. "You're going to want to see this. Turn on any business channel." She didn't have to wait long. On every screen in the office, bold text flashed across the bottom: Atlas Systems under federal investigation for data manipulation, insider deals. Atlas, the billion-dollar legacy tech company that had quietly fought against Novatek's rise from day one, was under full federal probe. The headlines kept pouring in. Whistleblowers had come forward. Documents had leaked. A secret internal project, dubbed Project Ghost, had apparently siphoned sensitive user data for years, selling it to political actors and ad agencies under the radar. Sarah stood frozen for a moment as the news continued. Atlas CEO Jeremy Callan named in lawsuit. Tech ethics advocates demand systemic reform. Atlas stock down 44% at open. Novatek's offices remained quiet for several minutes, the kind of stunned silence only seismic news can bring. And then, slowly, cheers erupted from a few desks. Sarah didn't smile. Not yet. She wasn't sure she believed in victory like that anymore. Not when the damage left behind would take years to undo. But she did believe in accountability. That morning, reporters flooded her inbox. What did this mean for Novatek? Did she feel vindicated? Would the Accord demand a full investigation into all legacy firms now? She gave one statement, simple and sharp. For years, we were told ethics and innovation couldn't coexist. Now the world is learning the cost of that lie. We won't stop until trust is built back, company by company, choice by choice. Internally, Sarah moved fast. Novatek pushed out a new campaign focused on rebuilding trust, titled Beyond the Algorithm. It featured real stories, teachers using Novatek tools in classrooms, activists organizing with Novatek's secure communication suite, doctors improving diagnostics using their AI. No influencers, no tech speak. Just people. The faces of those who benefited from a platform designed to serve them, not exploit them. But in the following days, Sarah noticed something she hadn't expected: fear. It wasn't coming from enemies this time, it was coming from allies. Founders within the Accord, even some of Sarah's earliest supporters, began sending her cautious messages. "We love what you're doing, but we're getting pressure. Some investors are starting to pull back from ethics-first models. We're being told not to associate too publicly with Novatech right now. It's too political." Sarah read these messages late at night, sitting alone in her office. One after another. Friends growing distant. Allies retreating. The problem wasn't just the fall of Atlas. It was that their collapse shook the ecosystem so hard, everyone who'd stood near them was now scrambling to avoid being buried under the debris. Even the good ones. Even the brave ones. Michael came by late one evening, noticing the wear on her face. "You okay?" "No," she admitted, looking up from her laptop. "We're winning battles, but losing the narrative. People are scared of what comes after the giants fall." He leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "So what do we do?" Sarah stared out the window, the city lights scattered like stars below. "We tell the truth louder. We show people it's not the fall of tech, it's the beginning of something better." She decided right then to do something she'd avoided until now: go fully public with her story. Not just the company version. Not just the press-friendly sound bites. The whole thing. Emma helped her draft it. A full essay, written in Sarah's voice, titled, "What I Saw, Why I Stayed." It detailed her early days in the industry, the betrayal that nearly broke her, the smear campaigns, the loneliness of ethical leadership, and how the very people who tried to ruin her had made her stronger. It ended with a line that resonated across the internet within hours. "Sometimes the future is written not by who rises, but by who refuses to fall." The piece went viral. Again, not because it was polished, but because it was true. Women founders began reposting it. Developers in basements and college dorms. Teachers. Journalists. Regular users who had long felt manipulated by big tech and powerless to do anything about it. Sarah's story gave them permission to believe that good things could still be built. The essay opened new doors. Sarah was invited to speak at MIT, at South by Southwest, at the United Nations Tech Summit. Not to sell. Not to spin. Just to speak plainly about what she had learned. She turned many offers down. She didn't want fame. She wanted impact. But there was one offer she couldn't ignore: a meeting with the newly appointed Federal AI Commission, a bipartisan agency tasked with creating the nation's first comprehensive tech ethics legislation. The room was filled with skeptical policymakers, lawyers, economists, and engineers. Sarah stood before them not as a tech titan, but as someone who had earned every scar. She spoke about responsibility without fear, about building models that serve humans, not just habits. She offered Novatech's open-source audit framework free to the commission. One senator asked, "Why give this away for nothing? You could make a fortune licensing it." Sarah looked him in the eye and said, "Because trust doesn't scale behind a paywall." The room went still. Days later, the commission made it official. Novatech's transparency framework would become a national template for AI accountability. Back home, the mood in the Novatech offices changed. Not giddy. Not arrogant. But proud. The kind of pride that came from holding the line for so long, and finally seeing the world move an inch closer. Sarah gathered her team on a Friday afternoon. No fanfare. Just standing in the middle of the open floor with her sleeves rolled up. "You've all done something impossible," she said. "You've helped change how the world thinks about what tech can be. Not perfect. Not pure. But better. And now we get to keep building." Emma clapped first. Then the others followed. A slow, rising sound. Not for a company. But for the mission. As people trickled out for the weekend, Sarah stayed behind, watching the office slowly empty, lights dimming. She stood at the large glass window overlooking the skyline. So much had changed. And yet, her purpose was sharper than ever. She didn't believe in fairy tale endings. But she believed in continuance. In the idea that sometimes, surviving, and refusing to compromise, was the most radical act of all. The giants had fallen. But Sarah? She was still standing. By the time summer arrived, Novatech had become a household name, not through aggressive marketing, but through persistence, resilience, and principle. Sarah had become a symbol, yes, but she was still human. And humans, even leaders, carry scars that don't fully heal. With Atlas Systems in freefall and the public tide turning in Novatech's favor, it would have been easy to relax, to breathe for once. But that's not what happened. Instead, Sarah found herself plagued by a question. What happens when your greatest threat is no longer outside, but inside? It began with a quiet resignation. Maria Ortega, Novatech's director of platform safety, one of the original team members, submitted her notice. Sarah was stunned. Maria had never hinted at dissatisfaction, had never missed a deadline, had never failed to speak her mind when something didn't sit right. So when she walked into Sarah's office, closed the door gently, and sat without saying a word, Sarah braced herself. "I'm not angry," Maria began. "I'm tired." Sarah frowned. Tired of what? Tired of being the guardrail no one wants to admit we need. Every new feature gets pushed forward before it's vetted. Every policy debate gets rushed. And the truth is, Novatech isn't as clean as we say it is anymore. Sarah's heart dropped. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we've grown too fast. We've hired teams we don't fully oversee. We've onboarded partners with conflicting incentives. And while you've been out there saving the soul of the industry, some of us in here have been fighting to keep the cracks from spreading." Sarah didn't sleep that night. Maria's words haunted her. Not because they were unfair, but because they might be true. The next morning, Sarah called a confidential meeting with Emma, David, and Amina. She laid it all out. "We've been fighting so hard to prove we're the good guys, we might have missed the places where we're slipping. I don't want a scandal to teach us that. I want us to audit ourselves." The room fell quiet. Then Amina spoke. "I've seen some red flags too. Pressure to meet quarterly targets. HR turnover up. One of our satellite teams was caught copying code from a competitor. I kept it quiet, but maybe I shouldn't have." Sarah nodded. "It's not about blame. It's about being what we say we are." So they created an independent internal task force, outside the core executive team, empowered to examine Novatech's operations, product ethics, security, and hiring pipelines. Their findings would be made public, regardless of the results. Emma, ever the truth teller, raised the hardest question. "What if they find something bad?" "Then we fix it," Sarah said. "And we tell the world we did." The audit began quietly, but word leaked, and soon the press jumped on it. Some praised the bold transparency. Others questioned whether the company was trying to get ahead of another scandal. Sarah ignored the noise. She had learned long ago that you can't build a future by managing appearances. You had to manage substance. Weeks passed. Tension simmered inside Novatech. Employees whispered in corners. Some feared layoffs. Others feared reputational damage. A few welcomed the review, saying it was long overdue. Then, in late July, the task force delivered its findings. Sarah read the report cover to cover, alone in her office, as a storm rolled across the bay. The good, Novatech's core infrastructure was sound. No evidence of major breaches or unethical product deployment. Their data protocols were considered among the most secure in the industry. The bad, a pattern of rushed product rollouts that skipped final stage ethics review. A lack of representation on certain project teams. Inconsistent enforcement of policies for partner companies using Novatech's API. And most damning of all, a small, outsourced development group in Eastern Europe had built a feature that created the possibility of behavior profiling far beyond what Novatech had ever intended. It hadn't been activated. But it could have been. And no one had flagged it. Sarah closed the file, her hands shaking. This wasn't a breach of law, it was a breach of vision. They had promised to do better. To be better. And now she had a decision to make. Protect the brand or reveal the truth and rebuild from there. She didn't hesitate. That night, she stood before her team, before cameras, and before a live stream that reached nearly 500,000 viewers. She laid it all bare. We made mistakes. Not malicious ones. But avoidable ones. And for that, I take full responsibility. We cannot be a company that hides its flaws. If we want to lead with integrity, we have to tell the truth, especially when it's uncomfortable. She outlined a corrective plan, mandatory ethics checkpoints before every rollout. A restructuring of all third-party contracts. A 20% increase in compensation for frontline ethics reviewers. And finally, the termination of the risky code, completely, transparently, with a full breakdown of why it had never aligned with Novatech's mission. The response was mixed. Critics said she was admitting too much. Supporters said this was why they believed in her. But Sarah didn't care about the polls. She cared about the people inside her walls, and what they were seeing in her leadership. Emma hugged her after the broadcast. You didn't have to do that. You could have buried it in legal language and moved on. Sarah shook her head. That's what they do. That's what got us here. Later that week, Maria came back to the office, not to rescind her resignation, but to say thank you. You listened. Most people in your position don't. I didn't come this far to become the thing we fought, Sarah said. Even if it means we slow down, even if we lose some ground, I'd rather build something worth standing on. The next few weeks brought a strange clarity. The noise quieted. The internal culture, shaken but honest, recalibrated. People worked not with fear, but with renewed purpose. And Sarah, burnt out, but not broken, felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, peace. One evening, she walked the halls alone, watching her team laugh in the break room, collaborate in glass-walled offices, argue passionately over strategy in the corner huddle spaces. It wasn't perfect. But it was alive. At the edge of the hallway, a junior engineer she didn't know very well looked up and said, "Hey, thanks for not faking it." Sarah smiled. Thanks for still showing up. That night, she drafted a message to her team. We will never be flawless. But we can always be faithful, to the truth, to each other, and to the mission. The reckoning never ends. That's the price of building something real. She hit send. Then, for the first time in weeks, she closed her laptop, stepped outside, and watched the stars without thinking about how far they were. The sun rose early that morning, golden threads weaving across the skyline like a promise. Sarah stood alone on the Novatech rooftop, a mug of black coffee warming her hands, the city humming below with the kind of restless anticipation she now knew by heart. It had been 3 years since she launched Novatech. 3 years since betrayal, collapse, redemption, and reckoning. But today was different. Today was the last day she would walk into that building as CEO. It wasn't a retreat. It was an evolution. The decision hadn't come easily. Sarah had resisted it for months, even as her advisors gently urged her to think long-term. She was no longer the only one capable of steering the ship. Novatech had matured. So had she. And somewhere along the way, she realized that holding on too tightly could stifle the very movement she'd helped spark. The future needed more voices, more leadership, more room to grow. She had given everything she had to Novatech. And now, it was time to let it breathe without her shadow hanging over every decision. Her announcement went out a week ago, an open letter, not polished but personal. It was shared across platforms, quoted in major media, dissected on talk shows. She had expected backlash. She got gratitude instead. From her employees. From partners. From everyday users. People who had never met her but had built something better because of what she'd made possible. And from the other CEOs who said they might follow her lead. A founder stepping down not in crisis, but in clarity, that's a story we don't hear enough, one columnist wrote. Sarah built something beautiful and chose not to hoard it. That, in itself, is legacy. That morning, as she watched the sun climb, David joined her on the roof, 2 croissants in hand. "You're really doing it," he said, passing her one. She nodded. "Feels weird." He smiled. "Yeah, but good weird. Like putting down a heavy backpack and realizing you can still walk." Downstairs, the office was filling with familiar faces. Emma, now officially the incoming CEO, moved like she'd been preparing for this moment her whole life. Her calm strength had deepened, not just from surviving storms, but from learning how to guide others through theirs. Amina had accepted a dual role as Chief Culture Officer and Head of Community Strategy, leading Novatech's expansion into underserved regions. David was considering launching a venture fund dedicated to tech-for-good startups, inspired by the kind of founder Sarah had been. And Sarah? She wasn't disappearing. She was transitioning into a role she never thought she'd want, chair of the Novatech Foundation. A branch of the company that would focus solely on ethical innovation, education, and advocacy. It wouldn't build products. It would build people. As she walked through the office one last time in her current role, employees paused to hug her, thank her, hand her handwritten notes and gifts, art, books, even a framed quote from her first major speech, "We're not just building tech. We're building the world we want to live in." Someone had added underneath, "And you showed us how." The final gathering happened in the atrium. No press. No stage. Just a circle of team members, past and present, arms crossed or tearfully open, waiting for her to speak. Sarah stepped into the center, holding nothing but her truth. "I didn't know what I was doing when this started," she began. "I just knew what I didn't want to become. I didn't want to lie. I didn't want to chase numbers instead of impact. I didn't want to be remembered for a product, I wanted to be remembered for a principle." She paused, scanning the crowd. "And every single one of you made that possible. Not because you were perfect. But because you kept choosing what was right, even when it was hard." Her voice wavered, but she didn't hide it. "This isn't a goodbye. It's a handoff. Novatech doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to all of you. And if I've done my job right, it always did." Emma stepped forward, hugged her without a word, and the entire room followed. Later that evening, after the office dimmed and emptied, Sarah walked back up to the roof alone. No media crews. No investors. No clickbait headlines. Just her, the stars, and a quiet she had earned. She thought of the beginning. That first betrayal. The whispers. The fear. The loneliness. Then, the decision to fight back. The allies who emerged. The nights she nearly gave up. The people who believed when she couldn't. And how, somehow, it all led here, not to triumph, but to transformation. Her phone buzzed. A text from Michael. "Proud of you. Want to grab a drink and talk about literally anything but tech?" She smiled and typed back. "Absolutely. But first, I want to sit in this moment a little longer." Then, she turned her gaze upward. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the weight of the world pressing down on her. She felt lifted. Not by success. Not by applause. But by the simple truth that she had walked through fire, refused to become the villain, and left something good behind. The kind of good that doesn't burn out. It burns on. Elon Musk once said, "One bad friend can ruin your life." Sarah learned that the hard way. But she also learned something deeper: the right people can save it. The right choices can define it. And the right moment to let go can become your greatest act of leadership. Because in the end, legacy isn't what you build for yourself. It's what you leave standing after you step away. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?